Howdy everyone, Runt9 here, and welcome to another non-gaming focused bonus top 10 quarterbacks of all time. This is a bonus because the second top 10 One Step from Eden video did hit its 50 view goal in 3 hours. It was scheduled for 48 hours was the limit. We absolutely crushed that. So this is a bonus top 10. And I had a little bit of trouble deciding exactly what I wanted to do because there were a lot of options. But I knew that I've been a huge football fan my entire life. You know, really, my parents say that I was jumping up and down during the Cowboys Super Bowls being an infant. And as far as I can remember, I've been playing Madden for 20 plus years, or probably 25 years at this point. Been following football as long as I can possibly remember, digging deep into stats and everything like that. So I thought I would have a unique perspective on this. And I don't think there's going to be too many controversial things in here, but there's definitely going to be some. And also, like, I respect the old game as much as I respect the new game. And we'll kind of talk about that in a slide that I should probably start including in all of my top 10s. How do we judge the top 10? And the short of this slide is basically efficiency is valued over volume, longevity is valued over short peaks, and wins are not a quarterback stat. If you played really, really well on bad teams, that's more valuable than someone who had a great defense and a great running game and a great offensive line for their entire 10-year career. Now, that's not to say that quarterbacks who somehow manage to be on winning teams when they are the only constant across, 10, 15 plus years, that's still obviously incredibly valuable because you may have gone through coaching changes and have a completely different offensive line and all of that and still be successful. So that's obviously still very important. But in general, if you just threw a bunch of passes and got, 50,000 yards, that's not nearly as impressive as being head and shoulders above your peers. And that's going to be the biggest constant throughout all of this, is being head and shoulders above their peers at the time. And speaking of being head and shoulders above their peers, how about we start off with number 10, Norm Van Brocklin. Played from 1949 to 1960, most of it spent with the Los Angeles Rams. And as you can see here, and this is basically going to be pretty much the stat block that you're going to see. It probably could have been organized a little bit better, but you can feel free to read that while I'm analyzing each quarterback. Essentially, Norm Van Brocklin played in an era that the forward pass was still very much in its early evolution. And he set multiple records, best known for his 554 yards in a single game. That is just an incredible record for the era. I actually do not remember if it's been broken. I could swear that it was broken within the past couple of years. But even then, if you assume that it is stood for, 60 plus years, 70 plus years, that's just insane. And, you'll see a lot of the passer rating. Here's what they had for their career. Here's where the league average was. So he was 27% better than the league average over his career in passer rating, which is a pretty large margin. And his 1950 season, he led the league in touchdown percentage, yards per attempt, passer rating, and was second in completion percentage and interception percentage. Also led the league in yards per attempt multiple times over his career. I think that's real telling of Norm Van Brocklin's career is he basically was the pinnacle of moving the ball down the field with the forward pass during a time that still it wasn't very popular at all. Most teams still ran the ball a lot. His yards per attempt was huge for the time and definitely was very much not necessarily innovative, but trend setting for the league. As you started to move into the later part of the 50s, you saw more teams starting to pick it up, especially in the AFL. And I think that Norm Van Brocklin was one of the faces of the forward pass movement in the early 50s that kind of spurred those trends on. And I think that you do a disservice to a top 10 quarterbacks list without including Norm Van Brocklin, even if he isn't, one of the most prolific of all time. I think from an importance standpoint to the position, his efficiency stats, and just how far ahead of everyone else at the time he was over his career. Now for number 9, Joe Montana, this is where I already felt a wave of people leaving. Again, a big part of this is being head and shoulders above your peers and being able to do a lot with a little. Joe Montana definitely did win 4 Super Bowls, and you can't ever take that away. He was, 8 Pro Bowls, 3 times All Pros, 2 times MVPs, absolutely, completely a phenomenal quarterback. And again, that 1989 season, as I have listed there, one of the single most efficient seasons of all time, maybe the most efficient passing season of all time, considering the era. In 1989, defenders were still allowed to maul receivers. But Joe Montana also played with the single greatest NFL player of all time, Jerry Rice. Not for every game in his career, but for a large percentage of it. And I do think that brings him down just a little bit. Also, in general, those San Francisco teams in the 80s were pretty stacked. I mean, they were a dynasty for a reason. But again, when you consider thousands of quarterbacks of all time, to be number 9 on this list still means you are incredibly good. And I do believe that Joe Montana was incredibly efficient. And even though his volume stats were not necessarily always top tier, they were still really solid. He was an incredibly efficient passer. And between him, I think Montana's brought down on this list from a singular performance because Bill Walsh is one of the greatest head coaches of all time. And I think that does, diminish a little bit of Joe Montana's singular performances. That's not to say that Joe Montana was a bad quarterback. Again, number 9 all time is still ridiculously high. And I do think that, and again, leading the league 5 times in completion percentage, he was ridiculously efficient. And I really, really value that. And I do think Joe Montana was an incredible quarterback. Going back to the classic era a little bit, you got Johnny Unitas at number 8. And again, when you talk about being head and shoulders above your competition, Johnny Unitas basically defined the modern era of passing. I mean, obviously the modern era of the Super Bowl era, I should say. He wasn't necessarily head and shoulders above in the efficiency stats, but his 1959 season was absolutely ridiculous. And he led the league 4 times in yards, touchdown percentage in yards per game, and 3 times in passer rating. He was legitimately the best quarterback at the time he played. And even though obviously he played around the same time as Joe Namath and a couple other good quarterbacks, you got Sonny Jurgensen, Fran Tarkenton, also very, very good quarterbacks. Legitimately, top 20 of all time quarterbacks. And Johnny Unitas was just that much better. Not to mention 3-time MVP, 5-time All-Pro, 10 times Pro Bowl. I mean, Johnny Unitas was just absolutely insane. And when you talk about telling the story of the NFL, when you talk about telling the story of how passing evolved, just like I don't think you can tell that story without Norm Van Brocklin, I don't think you can tell the story about the evolution of passing in the NFL without talking about Johnny Unitas. He's incredibly important to the history of the game. And it's not that the stats don't back it up either, because he certainly has the stats, both in volume and efficiency, over his entire career. He also had very few missed games. I mean, he definitely had some injuries and whatnot, but he also was very stable and did a great job of staying healthy and he basically obliterated the league throughout most of his career. And that's why he belongs in the top 10, at least in my opinion. And then number 7, Steve Young. And again, I'm feeling, especially the Niners fans, like, hold on, you think Steve Young is better than Joe Montana? Actually, yes. I think from an individual performance standpoint, Steve Young is the most efficient passer of all time. Now, don't get me wrong, Aaron Rodgers is giving him a run for his money, but Aaron Rodgers is also playing in the 2000s and 2010s, where passing is a lot easier. And yes, Steve Young, again, throwing to the single greatest receiver of all time, or single greatest NFL player of all time. But Steve Young was also the first real dual threat quarterback that still could pass incredibly well. And I think that combination, and I had to put his rushing stats on here, because as of this recording, He is number 2 all-time in rushing touchdowns and number 4 all-time in rushing yards, while also being, in my opinion, the single most efficient passer of all time. And in 1994, set the single season record for passer rating while also leading in completion percentage, touchdowns, touchdown percentage, and yards per attempt. You want to talk about Joe Montana having one of the most efficient seasons of all time? How about arguably, again, up there with one of the most efficient seasons of all time? Also, between 1985 and 1999, he had a 96.8 career passer rating. The NFL average in 2019 was 90. He's still above average for today in passer rating. And he also was an incredible runner. That's why I think he's better than Joe Montana. Now, were those 49er teams in the late 80s and early 90s better than the early 80s to mid 80s when Joe Montana was at his peak? Maybe, maybe not. But this isn't top 10 teams of all time. This is top 10 quarterbacks. And I do think Steve Young, as an individual contributor to the team, was a better quarterback than Joe Montana and definitely deserves the number 7 spot on this list. Now, number 6, Brett Favre. I know this goes a little bit against the judgment that we set up at the beginning, a little bit of the scoring, because Brett Favre certainly was far from efficient. He is the pinnacle of a gunslinger. But I did mention longevity and doing a lot with a little. Those Packers teams throughout the whole 90s did have some good receivers. And I do think that Sterling Sharp would have been one of the greatest receivers of all time had his career not been cut short by injuries. When Shannon Sharp was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he even said, "I'm the second best receiver in my family," or second best NFL player in my family. And I do believe that. I do think Sterling Sharp was an incredible receiver. I think that, later on in his career when he had receivers like Donald Driver, or middle of his career, Antonio Freeman, stuff like that, I think he had good receivers and a couple of great receivers. But he never had super incredible Hall of Fame receivers. He wasn't playing with Jerry Rice. He wasn't playing with, some of these top tier receivers that have ever played the game. And in addition, I think that the defenses kind of went up and down throughout his career. There were a lot of Packers teams that Brett Favre put the team on his back. But also, look at how long he played. And the biggest reason for me that Brett Favre is on this list is 297 consecutive starts. That record, it's already head and shoulders above anybody else ever. But I also think that that record will never be broken. And I know that it's a cliche thing to say, but the best ability is availability. And it's not to say that he wasn't one of the best quarterbacks of all time, and definitely one of the best quarterbacks during the entire time period he played, which was basically 20 years. I do think that his stats are maybe not quite as good as some of his peers at the time. He wasn't head and shoulders above. But when you consider how many hits he took, how many games he played, and how successful he was in clutch moments, yeah, he would throw a dumb pick almost every game. But there would be other times that just from a raw ability standpoint, there were so many passes that he completed over his 20-year career that no quarterback in the history of the game has ever been able to make. And legitimately the only player that I think comes close to his ability to find the tiniest window and rifle the ball in there is Patrick Mahomes. And he's still too new for me to say anything about, is his ability going to carry out long term? But he's the only quarterback that I've seen be able to come close to Brett Favre's gunslinging ability. Again, when you tell the story of passing in the NFL, I don't think you can tell the story without Brett Favre. But the pinnacle of you can't tell the story of passing without mentioning this player, number 5, Sammy Baugh, is essentially the creator of here's what forward passing looks like. Obviously, the forward pass was a thing, but Slingin' Sammy Baugh is absolutely the single greatest quarterback before the Super Bowl era from a stats perspective. 54% higher career passer rating than the rest of the league. His 1947 season is arguably one of the greatest single-season performances compared to his peers of any quarterback of all time. He also holds the record for the most times leading the league in completion percentage and passer rating, and led the league 4 times in yards as well. He was the definition of head and shoulders above his competition. There are no other quarterbacks in that 37 to 52 era that come even close to how good Sammy Baugh was. And does he have a whole bunch of records that stack up today? No. Does he have a whole ton of volume stats that stack up today? No. But absolutely, the beginning of the forward pass in the NFL, the beginning of a quarterback putting the team on his back, and, well, okay, he didn't put the team on his back, but he definitely did lead the innovation and lead us into the era of the forward pass becoming a popular concept. Sammy Baugh, you cannot tell the story of the forward pass in the NFL without Sammy Baugh. Even if you took everyone else off this list and said, we're going to tell the story without it, you have to start at Sammy Baugh. And I think that importance to the game, not to mention how incredibly above every other quarterback at the time he was, absolutely puts him in the top half of this list. And now we get back to a modern era quarterback with number 4, Peyton Manning. And honestly, I had a really hard time with this top 4. There was a few that I shifted around a couple times. And it's hard for me not to put Peyton Manning higher, because you've got to believe that when he retired, from a stats perspective, he was the greatest quarterback of all time. But I do think that some of his stats are more pure volume. But that said, 96.5 career passer rating is still ridiculously good, 17% higher than his peers. And the biggest thing for me with Peyton Manning, and the reason why he's number 4 on this list and not lower from, volume stats and good teams, Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne, and, some amazing offensive lines with people like Jeff Saturday and all that. I get that. But he set the NFL record for touchdown passes in a season in 2004. And then 9 years later, did it again. For a different team, after what should have been a career-ending neck injury. He came back with a new team with what I would consider to be good receivers. Not great, not like all-time amazing, but he had good to great receivers that year with Denver and absolutely destroyed the records. I mean, it was 54 touchdowns and 5,400 yards. That's incredible. And he would have been number 1 that year in passer rating and touchdown percentage if Nick Foles didn't do what he did that year with his 27 touchdown, 2 interception year, which is just insane. Literally the most efficient season of all time out of nowhere. But his 2004 and 2013 seasons were 9 seasons apart, and they're 2 of the best seasons a quarterback has ever had. Peyton Manning's longevity, his stats, and to me, and obviously it's kind of hard to tell this as a fan, but if someone asked me, who do you think is the smartest quarterback of all time, I would say Peyton Manning. His ability to process a defense and read from film exactly what a defense was going to do before the snap, and then change the play into something completely different to exploit that exact defense. His ability to do that is second to none. No one even comes close. There are a lot of quarterbacks that do that. Tom Brady and Tony Romo in the modern era did a lot of that. And, I'm a Cowboys fan. I know that Tony Romo covered up for a lot of offensive coordinator deficiencies. But Peyton Manning, is so far above everyone else from his ability to audible at the line that I think from the cerebral portion of it, and also, again, when I talk about telling the story of the NFL, can you tell the story of the forward pass in the NFL without talking about Peyton Manning? I don't think you can. And again, he did his dirty work over a really long career and was just incredible. Well, basically every year but the first and the last year. The 1998 and the 2015 seasons were not great. Every other season, he was legitimately number one or probably top three best quarterback in the NFL every single season. And that's so hard to do over that long of a time. And that's why I think he belongs at number 4. But if you want to talk about sheer dominance of the game, Otto Graham is number 3. And I mean, it's hard for me to not put him higher as well. Because, yes, I know that wins are not a quarterback stat. But he was in the league for 10 years. And every single year, his team went to the NFL championship. And won it 7 times. I realize that there's a lot of team around that, but it's just mind-blowing. But okay, so take away the wins. 56% higher career passer rating than his peers over his career. His 1947 season, again, one of the greatest seasons by a quarterback of all time. Completely dominated the league in every category, and he is still the career record holder for yards per attempt. And he played in the 40s and 50s. He played in the 40s and 50s and still holds the record for yards per attempt. That's just insane to me. And sure, his championship visits and championship wins, even if you dismiss that, he on his own was selected to 7 All-Pros. He played at the same time as Norm Van Brocklin. And I put Norm Van Brocklin on this list for being head and shoulders above his competition. Otto Graham was head and shoulders above Norm Van Brocklin. Like, that already right there is unfathomable. And again, story of the NFL, blah, 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 I'll hammer that point home. Otto Graham is legitimately one of the single greatest players of all time. And the fact that he's number 3 on this list tells you how highly I think of number 1 and 2. Let's find out who those are. Number 2, Dan Marino, the single greatest player to never win a Super Bowl. And again, I said wins are not a quarterback stat. And you're going to say also, isn't Dan Marino literally just the definition of volume stats? Yes, but. The but is, when you talk about being head and shoulders above your competition, Dan Marino is just ridiculously ahead of his time. Yes, his 1984 season, he was number 1 in passing attempts by 4. It's not like he threw 50 more passes than everyone else in the league. It was 4 out of, 654, if I remember correctly, when I was looking at the stats earlier. So, is that really... That's less than 1% higher than the next person. And there were still multiple other quarterbacks over 600 that year. But his yards and touchdown records took 20 years for Peyton Manning to break them. 20 years. And you're going to tell me that Dan Marino wasn't literally the greatest quarterback of that era from an individual contributor standpoint? Considering he played in an era with Jim Kelly, Joe Montana, Steve Young, Troy Aikman. You had so many good quarterbacks during that era. He came... Brett Favre, also on this list. He was playing during an era where literally multiple GOATs were playing and still managed to be 13% higher in career passer rating than the league average. 9 Pro Bowls, 3 times All-Pros. I don't care if he never won a Super Bowl. Also, go look at the eye test. The quickest release of all time, and arguably the best footwork of any quarterback I've ever seen on film. Now, was he a scrambler? Absolutely not. But he was literally the exact opposite of a statue in the pocket. He had light feet. He would bounce, and if there was a free rusher, he just flipped the ball and it went 50 yards. And his release was just ridiculously quick, and he was so smooth. And again, when he retired, he held every major passing record. He played for 16 years or 17 years. So it's not like he, played for 25 years to get those records. Yes, there's a lot of volume stats in there, and no, he was not more efficient than Steve Young. But to me, Dan Marino was ahead of his time. I legitimately think that the 1984 season is the single greatest passing performance by any quarterback ever. Were those records broken in future seasons? Yes. But go back to 1984 and tell me who was he throwing to? Was that a year with Mark Clayton? I think so. Okay. How many Hall of Famers did he have throughout all of those 83 to 99 Dolphins teams? Throughout all of those teams, how many Hall of Famers did he play with? Now compare that to other quarterbacks on this list. The definition of doing the most with the littlest, and it's mind-blowing to me that people don't value Dan Marino higher because he didn't win a Super Bowl. Wins are not a quarterback stat. But let's jump to number 1 and throw a counterpoint in here to that one. With number 1, Tom Brady. If you asked me this 5 years ago, okay, I would do my best to not put Tom Brady number 1. Tom Brady's played 20 years in the NFL. He's won 6 Super Bowls, 14-time Pro Bowl selection, 3-time All-Pro, 3-time MVP, and legitimately, you could make 100%, he has 2 Hall of Fame careers if you split him right down the middle. I don't know that I would agree with New England fans on 3 Hall of Fame careers, although the fact that that's even an argument is just obscene. And yes, he's going to play for Tampa Bay this year, LOL. That's hilarious. But the thing is, he's still going. And last year, even though maybe he didn't look as top form, to have played 20 years and still be competitive is incredible. I talked about longevity with Brett Favre, and sure, Tom Brady doesn't have the consecutive starts record, but other than the one season he missed due to what was just an unfortunate accident, someone didn't dive at his leg. He was trying to sack him, fell into his leg, and he tore his ACL and was out for the year. And okay, you'll say, yeah, in that year, Matt Castle led them to 11-5. Tom Brady is a property of, is good because of Belichick. I mean, we'll find out this year, although he's playing under Bruce Arians, who helped Peyton Manning become one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But I will say that with or without Belichick, with or without some of the historic defenses in the early 2000s, the one thing that I will say is Tom Brady has had an absolute slew of garbage receivers his entire career and still has been the best quarterback of all time. Yeah, you can say Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, sure. Lots of catches, lots of volume. The one year that they gave him a Hall of Fame receiver in Randy Moss, he broke every record. And that team went 16-0. And almost went 19-0, but the meme giants decided to take that away and make 18-1 the bane of Patriots fans' existence. I do not like the fact that Tom Brady is number 1 on this list. I avidly root against the Patriots every time they go to the playoffs. But even I can't deny Tom Brady is the GOAT. And the fact that he's still playing is insane. Absolutely insane. And we'll see this year what happens, Tom Brady not being under Belichick. And I mean, obviously at this point, this is what, his 21st season. You can't really expect him to play like 2007 Tom Brady to find out if it was really Belichick or not. But regardless, to me, Tom Brady is the greatest of all time. Wins or no wins, like the consistency over 20 years to be as good as he was for so many years, it's incredible and absolutely deserves to be number 1 on this list. So let's go back and recap. Number 10 was Norm Van Brocklin. Number 9, Joe Montana. Number 8, Johnny Unitas. Number 7, Steve Young. Number 6, Brett Favre. Number 5, Sammy Baugh. Number 4, Peyton Manning. Number 3, Otto Graham. 2, Dan Marino. And number 1, the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. And as a Cowboys fan, it really, really hurt me not to put Roger Staubach on this list. I just don't think he had the longevity to make this list. But I do think that Staubach is top 20, maybe top 15. And I realized there's a lot of quarterbacks left off this list. It was hard for me not to put Drew Brees on this list. You want to talk about efficiency and volume? Absolutely. And doing a lot with a little. How many Hall of Fame receivers has Drew Brees played with? It hurt me not to put him on this list. He's definitely top 15. But in my opinion, when I look at this list, I'm very content with it. And, maybe we can drop Dan Marino a little bit because it's a lot of volume stats. And, maybe Otto Graham, I'm emphasizing his wins too much or whatever. But at this point, I think the only one on here that is indisputable is Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time. And you can hear the sadness in my voice as I say that because I have to admit it. But it is as close to an objective truth as you can have in the greatest of all time lists for the NFL. The only one that I think is more objectively true is Jerry Rice is the greatest receiver of all time. That's the only other thing that is more objectively true than Tom Brady being the greatest quarterback of all time. So anyways, guys, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the single greatest thing you can do to help out the channel is clicking the like button. Sends a message to YouTube that, hey, other people might like this video. Let it get slurped up into the algorithm and fed to as many people as possible. And in addition, this is mostly a gaming-focused channel, so if you are interested in checking out some cool indie games, I play a lot of them on the channel. Go ahead and subscribe for more of that content and some more neat top 10s in the future as well. And also, if you're interested in that gaming content as well, I stream 5 days a week over on twitch.tv/runt9plays, Wednesday through Sunday, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you can check out the community Discord, discord.runt9plays.com, if you want to come hang out and chat more about this list. I know there's going to be some controversy about a few of these selections, and I'd love to hear it, but I hope that I did proper justice to the classic era and the modern era when you adjust passing for how crazy things used to be in shorter game seasons and everything like that. So anyways, thank you guys so much. I can't say enough good things about the support. I was so unprepared to do 2 bonus top 10s this week, but I'm really glad it happened. Thank you all so much. And until next time, I'm Runt9, and I'll see you later.